As men, how often do you address your feelings? When we look at the reasons why we're happy, can you define those into exorbitant amounts of detail? Or is it just this is a moment for me? Or when you're sad, can you go into detail why it is that you might be upset? Why you're not feeling the way that you want to feel? Can you look at the times that you're upset and you're angry and you're possibly out of control? Can you find the reasons to why that you have been pushed into that moment where now you feel that this is the appropriate way for me to handle my feelings? As men, we set an example for our family, for our communities, and the way that we go about conducting ourselves. Now, when we look at our emotions, most of us as men may not want to contribute that our actions are influenced by our emotions. However, they are. And it may be an uncomfortable truth for you to grasp a hold of, but right now is the opportunity for you to actually look at your emotions. Why are you responding the way you are? Why do you feel the way that you feel? And when you start to be able to define those things, then you have the opportunity to search and to explore what got you to believing that this is the truth, that this is the reason as to why you should feel this way about this thing. Did your wife talk to you in a way that might make you feel disrespected? Well, how did you come up to the reason why that this means disrespect to you? And as we look back, we start to get answers as to why our feelings push us to doing the things that we do, which gives us the key to do things differently. Now, if you're living a life that you're not proud of and you're not doing the things that you want to be doing and having the experiences that you want, it is your responsibility because it is your fault that you're in that. But within fault and responsibility comes the opportunity to learn and grow. I want you to take this moment right now to explore your feelings. Roll that intro. I want to thank you for joining us at the Man Up and Own It show, where we deal with experiences that make men uncomfortable and share the stories of men that have overcome it. Today, I have the greatest honor to bring in someone that I've looked up to a long time, Kenny Weiss.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for you being on the show. Like, I didn't expect, honestly, when I sent the little message on Facebook that one, you would reply, two, that you would want to be on the show, but three, that you actually lived in Phoenix.
Yeah, we're like, am I 15 minutes from your studio?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I found you because I was in search of helping myself deal with the way that I felt about things, about me. Okay. Exploring my life and the way my interactions with my father had implemented onto me about the way that I was dealing with my family. Yeah. So can you give the audience just a rough overview of how you help men and other people?
Well, I guess it probably where it all starts from, the way, whether it's a man or a woman or anybody, is a new understanding and breaking down old assumptions and beliefs. Because most people think, especially in personal development, that our thoughts drive our behavior, drive our emotions. Most programs are set up to get you to think different. Well, every thought, every action starts with an emotion or a feeling. So if you're not dealing with your emotions and feelings, you got no shot. Mm-hmm. There are therapies and systems that are designed to mask over the emotion. And so you can Band-Aid it and suppress it, but you're not growing it, you're not changing it, and that suppression, I liken it to this. the booster engines on the space shuttle.
Okay.
When you suppress pain, shame, any type of negative emotion, in the beginning, it's a tremendous fuel source. Mm-hmm. Well, at some point, it runs out of fuel and it explodes. That's what really what I call the midlife meltdown. Most people's lives, 35 to 50 blow up. Well, that's because as a society, studies show 70% of the population doesn't feel. They're detached from what they're feeling. You ask them and they go, fine.
Right.
Good.
It's like a scripted answer in a way, right?
They don't even know.
Yeah.
And so what happens is part of the brain degrades, and then all of that emotion comes up. Yep. And so what do most men do? They go back to what worked in high school. I'm going to buy a fast car. I'm going to chase women. Because it worked.
Absolutely.
It suppressed it. All it does now is accelerate it. And what's heartbreaking to me, especially when it comes to men, is they're still being taught this, be stoic. A man controls his feelings. Well, none of that's control. It's suppression. Mm. And so this false image of a strong man is actually a very weak, insecure, shame-based man who's hiding behind a facade. Right. And that I find heartbreaking because inside he's trapped. Mm-hmm. Because if he doesn't live up to that, he's not a man. But if he opens up to it, he's no longer, he's in a double bind.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of the main things I help a man is learning how to grieve that lie they've been taught and start addressing that suppressed emotion that they've never been given permission to experience or feel.
Well, in some ways, it's almost scary, right? That the identity that they held on to for so long is a lie. And now they have to go out and find something new. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that anger is a secondary emotion. It's a byproduct of being scared or being uncomfortable or something, right?
Yeah, that's what I talk about that in my first book. Can I give a shameless plug?
Go for it.
It's called Your Journey to Success, and I have a chapter on fear. And you're right, anger is a cover emotion. Anger covers fear. And fear is always one of three things. You either fear rejection, you fear inadequacy. In other words, you don't think you have the knowledge, skills, or tools to do something, or you're afraid of powerlessness. So whenever you're witnessing any man or woman angry, this is what I want you to picture. Picture a 5-year-old.
5-year-old?
In the corner, right there.
Okay.
Screaming at you.
All right.
Please don't find out how inadequate and powerless I feel right now, and by God, don't you dare reject me.
Okay.
That's what's happening. And I'll explain a little bit more deeply about each one. But then fear is also another cover emotion. It covers sadness and pain.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, underneath all of that anger is trauma.
Yeah.
That's what we're struggling with. And so, I've developed processes of, look, rejection is a simple fear to overcome. The first thing you have to recognize is it's not even humanly possible for someone to reject us. That's a codependent dynamic we've passed down for centuries. What kind of pizza do you like?
Meat lovers.
Meat lovers. Okay. So if I said to you, I like veggie lovers, is that a reflection on you?
No.
Why?
Because it's your own preference.
Yes. What? And same thing if you have blonde hair, blue, tall, short, heavy.
Right.
This person decided to leave you because all of a sudden they wanted veggie lovers, not meat lovers. It had nothing to do with you. It's somebody's personal choice.
Right.
But we've all been raised codependently, and so we make it about us.
We need validation to feel like we're worthy, right?
And that's the problem. Mm-hmm. The only person who can validate us is ourselves. Right. And so rejection is ultimately, to heal that, it's a self-esteem issue. Right. It's learning, because our world is set up, especially men, outside validation.
Well, of course.
Do I have the corner office? Do I have the sports car? Do I have the trophy wife? What are my what are the accoutrements that I can sell to you to show I'm a success?
Right.
And without that, I'm nothing. I'll be rejected. And so what's hidden behind that? Inadequacy.
Resentment.
Yes. And well, resentment is more a powerless dynamic because now you have control over me. Because if I resent you, that means you own me. So think of it when you resent somebody. They're not even in the room. They're at work or whatever. But you have just made them your God. They own you, and they're not even there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And
so resentment's a control and power dynamic because we feel so powerless. It gives us a victim righteous anger.
Right.
And which feels powerful, but it's hiding that deep hidden shame, the sadness that we don't want to deal with.
Now, do you think that there's a resentment towards ourselves for not living up to expectations?
That's what that same book, I show that what happens is, and this is true for everybody, and this would be hard to swallow, every single one of us has been through childhood trauma and severe childhood trauma. And I can prove that in 3 questions. I'm going to skip that for now. But what that creates is something I call the worst day cycle, which consists of 4 things: trauma, fear, shame, and denial. I'm not going to go into it all, but what happens is, especially when we experience trauma, it's a loss of self. That sends us into fear.
Okay.
I'm skipping a lot. But because we feel so rejected, inadequate, and powerless, that creates shame. Now, shame is a power dynamic. It's the loss of power. Well, what's the greatest way to get power back? To be the victim. To be sick and hurt and have our life go to hell. Because what happens, I post on Facebook and I get 300 people, oh my God, you're so good looking. They're the problem, not you. Right?
There's that validation again.
And exactly. And so what we don't realize, it also gets into how our brain and body works. Our brain is an addicted machine. It constantly seeks to repeat what it knows, what it's previously experienced, even if it's bad.
Yeah.
And so we get, because of childhood trauma, all we do as adults is relive it against ourselves. And there's the resentment against ourselves. And do you see what's the benefit if I blame myself? Do you see what some of the benefits I get from that?
No, please.
Well, think of it. If I'm to blame, what possibility does that open?
Only the opportunity for you to change.
Amen. Power in both directions.
Right.
I'm not only the one destroying myself, but there's hope I can lift myself out of it.
Absolutely.
Now, most of us can't because of stage 4 denial.
Right.
We reject this new information, stuff like that. Our brain is actually designed whenever we hear or see, touch, smell, taste, anything we've never experienced, we go into denial, we push it away.
Right.
And so that keeps the cycle going, the re-victimization going. And so at the very bottom of all of our pain, when we're beating ourselves up and resenting ourselves, how many times have you sat there with your head down going, come on, I can, if I just stop doing this, I can get through this. I can change it.
Every time.
And that's the hope piece.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of the dynamic. Now, the difficulty, the reason it doesn't work is because we've never dealt with the underlying trauma that keeps us repeating that cycle of shame and denial down at the bottom. So until a man or woman goes back and becomes an expert in their emotions and learns how to navigate this, so their brain and body gets addicted to new emotions that work for them, not against them, then they'll just keep that victimization, resentment cycle going.
Absolutely. How many men do you think are out there living this cycle?
Every person I've ever met, you can bring the most successful person on the planet you've met, and in 3 questions, I can show you how they're still struggling with it. All of us are. Nobody overcomes childhood trauma. You achieve substantial recovery.
Okay.
But we're human.
Right.
We're limited. And this is what's really hard for men because we've been sold, the Stoic thing, that we can conquer anything.
Yeah.
You cannot conquer being human and limited. I was talking to your wife before this, and I won't divulge the conversation, but there was a point in it, and I asked her if she was a football fan. And she's like, no. And I'm like, but you know Tom Brady, right? And most men know Tom Brady. He's in the conversation of one of the greatest athletes that has ever lived. Well, here's somebody who for 40 years has been surrounded by experts in how to throw a ball, how to think, how to eat, every aspect of high performance. Yet every single day, he throws an incompletion, an interception, a fumble, he has a misread. In other words, he's incredibly human and limited, one of the most gifted people that's ever walked the planet. And that's something men have to let in, is no matter what my external success is.
Right.
See, I don't like, my definition of success doesn't fit the world's. It has nothing to do with what you achieve as a person. To me, it's an internal process. It has nothing to do with external. But that's what men have been taught.
Right.
Your success is, once I can hold up the external, for me, it's completely different. It's what's going on inside.
It's almost like what it talks about in the Bible of not being worldly, right? Not being so attached to this external things, like, oh, I got this watch, I got these $1,000 shoes, I got all of this cool stuff that's been told to me that's cool.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I've been robbed of my own self-worth and the actions that I'm taking through my day.
And here's how you can tell when you're in your childhood trauma and out of every person on this planet is born with inherent value and worth. You can always tell when you're out of it, when you get grandiose and you're talking about your accolades and the things you've achieved. Because now your view of yourself is only elevated by what you've done.
Right.
Or conversely, you're shaming yourself for what you haven't done.
Interesting.
Inherent value and worth. I just be like, I'm always valuable. I'm always worthy. Neither one is an indication of whether I have it or not. If I'm focusing on either one, I've lost it.
Interesting.
I'm not in it. And that's what I mean. Success is an internal process. So if you become popular or make money, of course it's nice. Like the worldly stuff, I want people to have as much as they want. Get all the cars and houses and everything. What I'm advocating is that regardless if they have it, they're at peace. In my lifetime, I grew up around some of the wealthiest people, old money. And I wrote about this in my latest book, Your Journey to Yourself. The most difficult people to treat and the most damaged people on the planet are the so-called most successful.
Really?
Because of everything they've achieved, they're in such severe denial. They can't see that all of their value and worth is based on the external, but not the internal. They're completely detached from that.
It kind of goes against everything that they've believed to be true, right?
Yeah.
As they've subscribed to this idea that American society has constructed, that you're not successful unless you have the fancy car, the big house, the fancy vacations and all of that, right?
Yeah.
That the minute that that's removed, now they don't know who they are.
Yeah. I mean, look at most of the successful people in the divorces and the scandals and the addictions. And I have tremendous empathy for them because do you see because we don't teach about this other stuff, they're in a horrific double bind.
Yeah.
They're taught and told for you to have value and worth, you need to become all of this. Then once they get it, and watch any documentary of people who get it, they tell you they're miserable and they hate it and they wish they'd go back here. But the problem is our society goes, well, you can't complain. You've got what I want.
Yep.
You've got everything. So they have nowhere. They're trapped.
And they go to speak out against it. Now they have no support, They have no one to really empathize with them.
And then everyone throws them under the bus of, oh, I'd love to have your problems.
Yeah.
So they're I mean, so-called people down here, it's easier to treat them because they're in more truth and reality that they know they have imperfections.
Yeah.
But they're also incredibly intolerant for those up there.
Right.
Because they think,
That they have what they want, right?
They're more, I have to be careful how I phrase this. I'm not finding the right word, so I'm probably going to phrase this. Yeah, this won't be the way I want to say it, but it's the best I can do in this moment. Those that our society says so-called are less than, they're detached from their reality and from their inherent value and worth because they're throwing them under the bus or saying, I wish I had that. And then these do it to them too. So you're just seeing the exact same trauma and pain expressed in polar opposite ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no difference between the two, except this side of the scale inherently knows I'm less than perfect and I could use some help. These don't. They're like, what do you mean? I've got it all. Like they're almost impossible to treat. It's frightening to sit across from the toughest clients I've ever had were the most successful ones.
Yeah, they've already got it all figured out, right?
Well, if the wife or husband leaves, there's another one.
Absolutely. Isn't that it's kind of ironic that we live in a world right now where we have so many choices. Yeah. And oftentimes it reminds me, have you been to Cheesecake Factory?
Yeah.
How much do you like to sit down there and look through that menu?
To be honest with you, that's one of the places I like to go because, first of all, the portions are huge. And I'm not a paid advertiser. But my favorite food is appetizers. Like I want a bite of everything. And so that menu I like, but I get your point. It can be debilitating. Right. Because there will be 5 to 8 things. I'm like, God, that sounds good tonight too. And then I can get frozen. Yeah. So I get your point. Yeah, it can be very difficult.
You talked about the implications that our childhood traumas have on us.
Yeah.
And I think about the example that my dad set for me. He was a power plant operator. Yeah. And he worked all the time. He came to just a handful of my basketball games. And I had played traveling team from 5th grade all the way through high school.
Yeah.
But he was never there. And so then I found myself as a father doing the same exact thing that he had set. Yeah. And that's where we started to try to make differences, trying to do things different to set a different example for my daughter.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say would be something that would help a man out there maybe do something different with his life to address and take accountability for those childhood traumas?
It reminds me, whenever I get asked this question, it's always the same 13 words. I grew up with an alcoholic mother who would be sober 4 to 6 weeks, and it was magic. Had a great relationship. And then she'd be in a walking coma for 7 to 10 days. So I suffered horrific, repeated abandonment over and over and over. And I had a father who was filled with rage. He was beat to death as a kid. He never hit us. But my parents were 16 and 18 when they were married, 21 and 23 with 4 kids.
Oh, wow.
They were still in their trauma, trying to raise us. And because of the worst day cycle, I lived out my trauma against myself, played 2 pro sports I see now I never wanted to play. They were adaptations to try and get this so I could have value and worth. Look at what I can do. Even, while I love fashion and I love clothes, I have to own that part of the brightness to what I mean, there's an authentic part of it is an expression of, I like myself now, but it is also an expression of my trauma of, will somebody please see me?
Yep.
because my mom would disappear and my dad wouldn't pay attention.
Yep.
But I was separating from my first wife, which was going to turn into a divorce. She was physically and verbally abusive. And I'd been to many counselors. My first counselor I went to at 21. And sadly, most of what they learn in school is how to diagnose and prescribe medication. They don't get taught how to heal. Yep. That's something a therapist or psychologist, they have to go learn that outside of school because they don't learn what they need to know.
Well, that school is a part of the system to keep people drugged, but that's another topic.
Luckily, I found Mike, and he had done that. And when I got finished telling him a little bit about my childhood and about the marriage and everything, and I was 38 years old. And I just turned to him and I said, Mike, I don't know how to be a man. And he looked at me and he said, Kenny, when I was in your shoes, I went and became an expert. And those 13 words changed my life. From that moment, if he suggested a book or a class, I took it. And so I don't care who you are, man or woman, there's only one way out of this. You got to become an expert. You got to do the work.
Yeah.
And that means you may be an entrepreneur and have dreams and you're working 80 hours a week. You're going to have to take 10 off and put it towards this, because if you don't, you're going to sabotage the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Your trauma is going to make you make decisions that'll screw everything up or make it take twice as long, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest piece I see entrepreneurs, business men and women, everybody, no matter what their endeavor is. They go, it's not affecting me. Nah. Well, they're vastly and severely undereducated on, I was, again, talking with your wife, 95 to 97% of our adult life, doesn't matter who you are, all you're doing is reliving your childhood. Most of our conversation, we're not present. No. We're replaying memories from the past. People think they're adults making decisions. Your childhood's running every aspect of your life. Now, you've got to do decades of work to learn how to step in on that. Well, there's only one way to do that. Go become an expert. And sadly, our society's still, it's not as bad as it was.
There was a lot of denial early on, right?
A lot of denial, but also stigma, and men are weak. You can't do that as men or even women, all this personal development stuff. It wasn't really till the 1970s with Oprah, Dr. Phil, not Dr. Phil, he came later. I'm seeing this, Donahue, all the TV talk shows.
Yeah.
That's the other thing people don't realize. The first psychology book wasn't written until the 1870s. Then you have Freud, Janet, or Jung, and some others in the early 1900s. But as a society, after being on this planet for millions of years, we didn't openly start talking about relationships, emotions, trauma, any of it, until the 1970s. What that shows is, as a species, when it comes to emotions, we haven't even discovered that the world isn't flat. Yeah. We don't know how to build fire or tools. We are that underdeveloped and undereducated.
Right.
We're 50 years into it kind of being okay.
Right.
So it's the single greatest deficit in every single look at politics. I don't care what side you're on.
Yeah.
That's just children.
Absolutely.
And those are the people, right? And there's my point. The most successful are the most broken.
Yep.
And they run our world.
Yep. And it's almost like they have the excuses not to have to deal with it because they have all of these other things.
Success.
Absolutely.
Yes. And that's why I say our world is run by the people that are so-called normal, don't have trauma, are okay. Well, do you see what that means? Our world is a reflection of them.
Yep.
They're responsible for this. They set the rules and the guidelines.
Yep.
But they don't think they're responsible. That's what I'm saying.
Well, in some ways, it's a lot like the parent, right?
Exactly.
Like if you went to your mom and you asked her, hey, do you think it's appropriate for you to be drunk all the time? she would probably
Get in your
say,
room. I don't want to talk about it.
absolutely. Or in her own mind, this is the only way that I feel confident in who I am because I really don't like who I am.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes, like the guys that I've worked with that had alcohol problems or drug problems, it was always to suppress a feeling.
Yeah.
They don't want to feel that way, or they, like the guy that has to get drunk to go out and dance with the girl.
Yeah.
Well, what made you believe that you had to be drunk? Well, it worked one time. Like you said, it worked.
Yeah. All addictions, they're not genetic. Every single addiction is an attempt to soothe intolerable pain, and it works for a period of time. But like the boosters on the space shuttle, it always boomerangs back and implodes even worse.
Well, I think we look at tolerances, right? And as we do something or take something, it takes more and more to reach that feeling. It's like chasing the dragon, right?
Yeah.
Guys who get into drinking. Well, the first couple of times it felt good, but then it took longer for me to achieve that feeling.
Yeah. And so that what I teach people is how to heal that feeling and create feelings that work for you, not against you.
Okay.
Because that's what's driving your life.
Sweet. So in your life, what was the one thing that pushed you over that made you literally go out and seek help? Was it that first wife?
No, I knew as a kid, I early on, my first memory of recognizing there was dysfunction in my family, I was somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. We went to my great-grandmother's 100th birthday, and I'm looking around. It's, I don't know, 50 to 100 adults and people and kids, and I'm looking around and at everybody. I'm like, these people are weird. There's a lot of dysfunction here. Like, these people are crazy. Like, you could see it in their eyes.
Yeah.
These are not well people. Like, I knew it back then. It was some sort of instinct. And so I think that's what drove me to see a counselor at 21 and all of it. What got me so invested in it was Mike. Once he made that comment and I started to do the research, all of a sudden life got easy. Life made sense. I could shift the way I felt.
Right.
I had solutions that worked.
Right, but you had done the repetitions to create the competency to give you the confidence.
No, I had none because, as I said, there I am, 30 years old, and saying I don't know how to be a man, and I, played pro hockey. I had a very successful remodeling and custom furniture making company. Like, I had succeeded, but at 38 years old, I was an amoeba. My childhood taught me that I could not have thoughts or feelings. I could not have needs or wants. My job was to disappear and mold myself into whatever you needed and take your abuse or whatever it is. So, I didn't even know I could ask a woman to marry me.
Wow.
I would lay in bed as a kid and dream about that. And my first wife asked me, I remember laying as a kid going, I wonder if she'll be pretty. I wonder if she'll be nice. And so when she asked me, I went, I guess this is her.
It fulfilled a fantasy in a way.
It wasn't a fantasy. What I'm trying to describe is how traumatic it was in childhood that I wasn't allowed to pursue my authenticity.
Gotcha.
And none of us are.
Yeah.
I can prove that to anybody. None of us are. We think we are, but it's too long and involved to teach people how they're reliving their trauma and they're not in their authenticity to do that in this format. But as I started to learn, I started to gain the confidence in everything.
Yep.
But it was my second marriage, my second divorce, where it arrived, because the withdrawal from that and the destruction of that, I almost took my life. I spent 3 days contemplating suicide. Actually, the note that I wrote to Mike while I was doing that is in my first book, the email I sent him. And I spent 3 days, I could write I was trying to write my kids a suicide note, and I could talk about the pain I was in. But when it came to writing about why it was the right decision for everybody, from becoming an expert, I'm like, oh, that's codependence, that's transference, that's it. I could not shrink myself.
Yep.
And I realized in that moment, I had an epiphany. It's like, I shouldn't be here. I've worked my ass off. Over that a 10-year period, I figured out I saw Mike probably once a week for 7 out of those 10 years. Like, I did the work, and yet here I am. And I'm like, so I went back, and when I realized I couldn't take my life because I couldn't live with the consequences, but I also couldn't live with how I was living, I went back in my office and I wrote down words to the effect of, I want to fundamentally change the psychology and personal development field and come up with unique I want to come up with unique processes that will fundamentally change the personal development and psychology field. And that's what I've done over the last 10 years. That moment, everything clicked. I discovered the worst day cycle, the authentic self, like how fear works. Like, it's just been epiphany after epiphany, because I learned, we were kind of talking about this, men are grinders and do it, complete waste of time. Yes, you have to work, but you have to learn how to let it come to you.
Yeah.
And that's what I learned.
So if the people out there want to come to you, how do they get a hold of you?
The best way is my website, KennyWeiss.net, I think is what it is.
And we'll have that in the description. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Man Up and Own It show, Kenny. And for you out there that wants to do something better with their lives, take action. Become the expert in the field. Make your feelings and the things that you went through in your life a priority. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Man Up and Own It show, where we discuss the uncomfortable things that happen in men's lives by sharing the stories of guys that have overcome it. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you can see the next episodes.